Okay, on the back side of the page, we have 2x squared plus 13x minus 7. These numbers do not have anything in common to take out, so we're going to do the x box method. 2 times negative 7 goes on top, so that would be negative 14, and 13 goes on the bottom. So that means we're looking for numbers that multiply to negative 14 and add to 13. Those are going to be 14 and negative 1. 2x squared will go in the first box, and negative 7 will go in the last box. And then we will use the 14 and the negative 1 to fill in these middle boxes with 14x and negative 1x. Then what goes on top, 2x squared and 1x would have x in common. 14x and 7 would have 7 in common. So my first factor is going to be x plus 7. Then I have 2x squared and 14x would have 2x in common. And negative 1x and negative 7 would have negative 1 in common. So my other factor will be 2x minus 1 equals 0. We're going to set these equal to 0. X plus 7 equals 0 would give me that x is going to equal negative 7. For 2x minus 1 equals 0, that is going to give me that x equals 1/2. So I'm going to have negative 7 and 1/2 as my two answers for x. And have 6x squared plus 5x plus 1, so we have a number in front of x. These do not have anything in common, so we will again need the x in the box. 6 times 1 is 6, so that's what goes on top. And 5, the middle number, goes on bottom. So we need numbers that multiply to 6 and add to 5. And those would be 2 and 3. 6x squared, the first term, goes in the first box, so we have 6x squared here. The last term 1 goes in the last one. And then the 2 and the 3 will become 2x and 3x, which will go in the middle boxes. So then we need to see what do 6x squared and 3x have in common, and that would be 3x. And then what 2x and 1 have in common is 1. And my first factor would be 3x plus 1. On the other side, we have 6x squared and 2x, that would have 2x in common, and then 3x and 1 would have 1 in common. So 2x plus 1 will be my other factor. Set these factors equal to 0. 3x plus 1 equals 0 will give me that x is going to be equal to negative 1/3. And for the other one, 2x plus 1 equals 0, we are going to get that x equals negative 1/2. So x for this one is going to equal negative 1/3 and negative 1/2. Okay. On number 7, we still don't have a greatest common factor that we can take out. And so we're going to do 4 times negative 5 to get negative 20. And negative 8 would go on the bottom. So we're looking for numbers that would multiply to negative 20 and add to negative 8. Those are going to be negative 10 and 2. And then because we have a number in front of the x squared, we do need to do the box as well, where 4x squared would go in the first box and negative 5 would go in the last box, because that is the first and the last term. And then the negative 10 and the 2 would become negative 10x and 2x. We see what these have in common. 4x squared and 2x would have 2x in common. Negative 10x and negative 5 would have a negative 5 in common. So 2x minus 5 is the first factor. Then 4x squared and negative 10x would have 2x in common. And 2x and negative 5 would have 1 in common. And so that'll give me 2x plus 1 as my second factor. Set these equal to 0. 2x minus 5 equals 0 is going to give me that x equals 5/2. And for 2x plus 1 equals 0, we're going to get that x is going to be equal to negative 1/2. So we have x equals 5/2 and negative 1/2. That's our two answers for x. On to number 8. Still no greatest common factor, so we are still going to need to do the x box. Here, 36 will go on top and 12 on the bottom. Numbers that multiply to 36 and add to 12 are going to be 6 and 6, which gives us for the box, we're going to have 4x squared here and 9 here, and 6x in both of these middle boxes. 4x squared and 6x would have 2x in common. 6x and 9 would have 3 in common. On the other side, 4x squared and 6x have 2x in common, and 6x and 9 have 3 in common. So these are actually the same factor, 2x plus 3 and 2x plus 3. Because they are the same factor, we actually only need to solve one of them because they're the same. So we have 2x plus 3 equals 0. And once we solve this one, that will be the answer for both factors because both factors are the same. So for this one, we are going to get that x equals negative 3/2. And we are only going to have one answer for this problem because negative 3/2 would work for both factors, and then that is our only answer. Okay, on to number 9. This one, our equation is not already set equal to 0, so the first thing we need to do is change it so that it is equal to 0. The way I can do that is by adding 2 to get rid of this minus 2, and then I'll need to add 2 to the other side as well. But I can't add 2 to 3x squared or to 7x, so when I add 2 to this side, I'm just going to get 3x squared plus 7x plus 2, and then the negative 2 plus 2 will cancel out to give me 0. These do not have a greatest common factor, so I'm going to do the x and the box, where 3 times 2 goes on top, which is 6. 7 goes on the bottom, so I need numbers that multiply to 6 and add to 7. Those would be 6 and 1. 3x squared, the first term goes in the first box, 2, the last term goes in the last box, and then 6 and 1 becomes 6x and 1x for the other two boxes. For 1x, you could put just x. 3x squared and x would have x in common, and 6x and 2 would have 2 in common. So my first factor will be x plus 2. For 3x squared and 6x, those would have 3x in common, and x and 2 would have 1 in common. So 3x plus 1 will be my other factor. For x plus 2, that is going to give me that x equals negative 2. And for 3x plus 1, this is going to give me that x equals negative 1/3. So we have x equals negative 2 and negative 1/3. Okay, on to number 10. Same thing, we need to change it so that it's equal to 0, not equal to negative 10x. So I can do that by subtracting 10x from both sides. Once again, I don't have anything over here that I can subtract 10x from. I can't subtract 10x from 8x squared or from 3 because neither of those have just x as their variable. So this is going to just be 8x squared minus 10x plus 3. One thing to note here is that the order of these is important. You want the x squared to be first, then the one that's just x, and then the one that does not have the variable at all. So it should be 8x squared, and then minus 10x, then plus 3, and that is equal to 0. Okay, then, once again, no greatest common factor, so we need to do the x and the box. 8 times 3 is 24. Negative 10 goes on the bottom. And then we're looking for numbers that multiply to 24 and add to negative 10. And so those are going to be negative 6. Oops, that's not a very good 6. Negative 6 and negative 4. And so this will set up our box with 8x squared and 3 in those boxes, and then negative 6x and negative 4x in these boxes. 4x would go on top because that's what 8x squared and negative 4x have in common. Negative 3 would go on top here because negative 6x and 3 have negative 3 in common. So the first factor would be 4x minus 3. And then 8x squared and negative 6x would have 2x in common, and negative 4x and 3 would have negative 1 in common. So 2x minus 1 will be the other factor. For 4x minus 3 equals 0, this is going to give me that x equals 3 over 4. And for 2x minus 1 equals 0, this is going to give me that x equals 1/2. So we're going to have x equals 3/4 and 1/2. All right, we have just 2 more. On number 11, again, we need to get rid of what's over here to make it equal to 0. So we're going to add 5, but we can't add 5 to 12x squared or to 32x. So when we add 5 to the other side, we will get 12x squared plus 32x plus 5, and then the negative 5 plus 5 cancels out to 0. For the x, 12 times 5 is 60, and we'll get 32 on the bottom. So then we need numbers that would multiply to 60 and add to 32. So let's see. For 60, we could get 1 times 60 or 2 times 30. Those are going to be the ones I want. 2 times 30. And then I can do the box with 12x squared and 5 in these boxes, 2x and 30x in these boxes. 12x squared and 30x would have 6x in common, and then 2x and 5 would have 1 in common. So 6x plus 1 would be my first factor, and then 12x squared and 2x would have 2x in common, 30x and 5 would have 5 in common, so my other factor will be 2x plus 5. For 6x plus 1 equals 0, we will get that x equals negative 1/6. And for 2x plus 5 equals 0, we will get that x equals negative 5 over 2. So x is going to equal negative 1/6 and negative 5/2. And I've got just one more problem. Again, we have some things that we're going to need to move over to the other side. We're going to need to subtract x squared. But this time, we do have something we can subtract that from. We can subtract that from the 5x squared here. So 5x squared minus x squared would give us 4x squared. And then we also need to subtract 2. But we can't subtract 2 from anything over here. So we're going to have this plus 7x and then the minus 2. These cancel out and give us 0. Again, make sure to have your x squared, and then your x, and then the one with no variable, in that order. Once again, there is no greatest common factor, so we need to do the x and the box. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8, and 7 goes on the bottom. Numbers that multiply to negative 8 and add to 7 would be 8 and negative 1. For the box, we would have 4x squared and negative 2, and then 8x and negative 1x, or you could put just negative x. 4x squared and negative x would have x in common. 8x and 2 would have 2 in common, so x plus 2 will be my first factor. And then 4x squared and 8x will have 4x in common. Negative 1x and negative 2 will have negative 1 in common. So we're going to have 4x minus 1 as my other factor. For x plus 2 equals 0, we're going to get x equals -2. And for 4x minus 1 equals 0, we will get that x equals 1/4. So our two numbers for x on number 12 are going to be x equals -2 and 1/4. So hopefully, if you've gotten to the end of this video, you've now seen enough examples that you were able to do them on your own. And the next page, front and back, is your assignment for today.